some code, and it's written in a scripting language, and then it gets executed. And there's another way where you have you have DLLs that get loaded. And so there's in-process DLLs and there's out-of-process DLLs. And it depends on like how you want to, basically, there wasn't a clean, people were experimenting with different in-process and out-of-process server technologies for rendering and how to communicate with databases. And so interactive objects, because it was, basically it was a bunch of people who had no business starting a company, making up a reason to start a company, and predatorial VC came in and sold them a shell, and they did a reverse merger. And so in a reverse merger, it's basically like a blank check company now today, where you have shares that are traded, but the company, it's basically it's partly accounting trick and it's partly a business trick. And it's highly abusable, but basically you have free trading shares, and then you agree to sell you do reverse splits to issue new shares to the people who are acquiring the shell, and then shares get unlocked over time, and everything is public, so you have to release it. But because the people who run the companies are Canadian or it's money from outside America, they just don't care about lying. So generally, there's some shareholders that are offshore that have shares and they're selling, and so this is how pump and dumps kind of work. So this so interactive objects is doing this web server thing. And so I got hired, and I literally just went there because they said, we'll pay you more than everybody else. And so I was just, okay. And then I went to work in a floor of a building in Seattle. They were based in Bellevue. And I worked on, if you ever heard of like RFC protocols, so POP3, SMTP,
yeah.
Those are all requests for comment protocols. And so my job was to look at those and write those in C++, so that they could be, so people who are making web pages can just buy this object. So that's what those interactive objects were. You buy an object, and then you have a Visual Basic interface into those things. And you didn't have to worry about threading. You didn't have to worry about like how these things worked, but you could make a web page or a web server. And it was during that time when I was kind of really bored. And I wanted to make a mixtape for my girlfriend. And in 1996, the MP3 protocol got approved through the ISO as a streaming format from satellites. And so I downloaded that and I looked at that, the decoder. And at the time, Pentiums just came out. So your computers could hardly even play MP3s without expending all the computation. And encoding was 3x decoding. And so that was the time where I started working on, so I bought a mini disc and Pocket PCs, the first generation, the E10, Casio E10, the first generation Pocket PC just came out. Mm-hmm. And then the first generation HPC. So at the beginning of Windows CE, there was a Palm PC, a HPC, handheld PC with a little keyboard. Mm-hmm. There was Stinger, which was the code name for the phone, Microsoft Windows for phone system. There was Auto PC, and each one of those platforms. And what they did was Microsoft, the idea was if we make a Win32 interface for an operating system, people will just program on it and we can get that layer. So they literally just kind of like made a Win32 layer, and then the kernel, and they hired a company in Seattle called B Squared to do kind of the underpinnings, the compiler work. And so the each of those platforms used a different processor. And the original Palm PC had a earphone jack, so you can listen to voice memos.
Yeah.
And so I looked at that and I was like, okay, I'll make a MP3 decoder. And you have to imagine that, like, in 1998, everybody thought this was stupid. Through 2002, before the iPod came out, mm-hmm. everyone thought this was stupid. Like, you couldn't go to a VC and say, I'm working on this digital media, I wrote this decoder. Like, everybody was thinking about streaming. Nobody thought about devices. Devices was like stupid. And everybody's approach to devices was not to make a single purpose device that was beautiful, well designed, and then to come out with them every year. Everybody's idea was to try to make, because Microsoft pumped money into everything needs to be a platform. So like everybody looked at things as a PC.
Right.
Like, it's kind of weird, but and it's frustrating. I should have moved to the Bay Area. Like the stupidest thing in my kind of career was just to like stick around with like really uncreative. So so the MP3 decoders and MPEG-2 decoders existed before on video games. So N64 had been out that uses a MIPS R3000.
Yep.
And so I had a friend who's a video game programmer, and he was like, "Oh yeah, when we make games on cartridges, we use MPEG-2 sometimes. It depends on licensing costs, and then we put all the audio assets into memory." And this particular friend of mine was like very, very good at C++. So I have to remind you, everything we did at this time was C++. So that's the language you did. That's what you learned at school. That's what you programmed at research lab. That's what you did when you get a job. And HTML and all this kind of stuff was just kind of like cute, but it was like stuff on top. It's kind of like, So I started building up a decoder, and also ID3. So metadata in MP3 didn't exist either.
Right.
In fact, Windows Media, no audio format that was used besides WAV existed.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just kind of give you an idea of like, and the idea of listening to audio on a device was just stupid. Flash memory at the time was, I think, $80 a megabyte.
Yeah.
And so so at any rate, obviously these things, time will go down, and there's like these major benefits: 10:1 compression, solid state, no skipping, and then CDs, had 0 to 10 when you put it in a player. So the idea of having metadata, be able to organize, be able to have a database of music, to be able to freely share, and this is before Napster, and then Winamp in the next year would come out. So I was working with the raw decoder, and I built up a decoder. I bought source code from, if I found open source code from different implementations in Germany or whatnot, I would give them $10,000, and then I would combine it, because everybody had different ideas of how to do stuff. But basically, and then I sought help. So I'm kind of a general programmer, but obviously what I'm talking about now is, I kind of dive in to learn stuff. But obviously the way to solve problems is to like talk to people who are niche experts and stuff. And in the MP3 algorithm, as you may or may not know, has the psychoacoustic model. So it has like a pipeline of all these different tricks, right? So it has Huffman encoding, has waveform analysis, has filtering, has a DCT, right? So it has all these kind of stages that it goes through in order to decode a signal. And it has and there's packets, so it can, and there's sync headers, and there's all this kind of stuff going on. And so first thing to do was profile all that. So, and then the first thing to do was like find a processor to work on. And because of the N64 R3000, if I got my hands on an N64 development station, I could use that processor to prototype on. And then Palm PC was out, and then the Visual Studio C++ compiler for building onto the Pocket PC existed. And then a friend from Microsoft, Kostas Malios, who's a really cool cat, he gave me, or he bought me an E10, and maybe E11, which has 4 megabytes versus 1. I forgot the difference of it. And I put in a timer in all the functions, so you get a printout list of all the time the compilers or the processors are spending in different functions, and then went through all the algorithms. So basically, the people who worked on it was Ezra Drybrock, who's the